I'm Larry Potash. Coming up tomorrow on WGN Morning News from 7 to 9, the struggle to stay fit and trim. Would you believe Kim Alexis has this problem? She's here tomorrow.
Charlie also said that he's been at this, figuring this out for a long time, and he would welcome your questions as he goes along. So if you want to interrupt him, and I know I don't feel at home unless I'm interrupted. It's a story around my house, so I think Charlie's the same.
Thank you. I'm not too into public speaking, I'll tell you that offhand, real quick, as you're going to find out for yourselves. Phil Wood told me that this would be nothing to this, just up in a few comments, and he'd be here to help me along. And he got himself sick. So, I graduated from high school in 1942. My mother was a widow on the farm, and I farmed for 1 year, so I did not have a long tenure in the military as many of these people did, but it was fun for a short time. So I went into the service in April of 1944 in Indianapolis, off to Camp Wheeler down around Macon, Georgia. Spent about 4 months down there, and they really get you in a proper frame of mind for fighting. We'd get all ready for to go to town on a pass, and all dressed up, ready to go, and they'd fall out, and they had pecan groves there on that base. You go out with a bayonet and cut the grass on an 80-acre pecan grove. Well, that got you in a proper frame, I'll guarantee you. And so after basic, which is a trying time, rolling through the sand on the infiltration courses and being sweaty and your clothes full of sand, and you start marching the 12 miles back in, and comes up a shower and gets you all wet, and they march you in it for about 20 minutes, and then they stop you and you put on a hot raincoat, and they run you the rest of the way in that raincoat with that sand under your straps. That's another fun thing. Anyway, we survived it, and after basic, I thought I was a forgotten soldier there. All my fellows that I'd gone through with shipped out, and here I am by myself with a new class coming in. I'm wondering, I'm here 2 or 3 weeks, and the others have all left, and all of a sudden I got my orders off to Fort Meade, Maryland. Spent about a month out there doing nothing. I don't know why they sent me there. But anyway, then orders came, and I was back to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I joined the 70th Infantry Division. They'd been formed out in Oregon, I guess in early '44, so there were a lot of West Coast people on it. Went through the more intensive training there, and in November we left Fort Leonard Wood and headed off for Massachusetts. A camp called Miles Standish was a port of embarkation. On the 6th of December in '44, we left out of Boston Harbor, headed out into the South Atlantic alone. Kind of scary to me. But this was a USS America, the largest ship in the fleet, and passenger ship in the American fleet. We went south of the equator, and there's quite a thing for sailors on that, but they left us alone. Took us 9 days. We went through the Straits of Gibraltar, into the Mediterranean, and into Marseille, France. Arrived there the 15th of December. Spent about a week in the Aix province there. That's in the Riviera area of France. Rained all the time. We're in 2-man pup tents, and the water is going right through them. It's kind of tough sleeping. But we managed, and we finally got out and we built bunkers around the outside to turn the water off, but that didn't do it all. So then on to a 40 and 8, which I'm sure most of you are familiar. It's a boxcar. It would hold 40 men or 8 horses. And I think the horses would have been more comfortable. This was in early or middle December, and it was a severe winter over there in 44. We stopped in practically every town on this train heading north into France, and every time you stopped, the little kids run alongside begging for chocolate and calgamy, they called it, which was chewing gum. And I'm sure that they hadn't had it for a long time. So naturally, GIs were a pretty generous bunch. If you came with your rations, and most of it was given away to the kids. And I'm sure they remembered that too. We were there about a week in Aix province, and started hearing the cannons and seeing bodies of German soldiers along the railroad right away as we headed north. And we went all the way to Alsace-Lorraine at that time, spent Christmas there in 44, and that was the end of the easier parts of it. We spent some time in Metz getting our equipment and so forth, and down to a little town called Philipsburg, France. And this was in the I can't pronounce this. It's Low Vosges Mountains. It's Vosges, and I'm not sure the pronunciation of that, but I spent a lot of time there. And my first taste of action was on New Year's Day in 1945, and the Germans had an offensive started there. Hitler called it Operation Northwind. And basically what this operation was to draw troops, American troops, away from the Ardennes. He was pinned down there and hurting, so he started this as a little side thing to draw troops away and give him a little breathing room up there. Well, that was rough. That first day that we were under fire, it lasted about 27 days. We had a lieutenant colonel, a West Point man, that was our commanding officer, and I was in a building. This is a town in a valley about 200 yards wide, with houses on either side, and then mountains in the rear. And the Germans infiltrated this town, and they had rifle grenades across the valley and shooting into the building we were in, a house. And the colonel come in to check on things, and about the time he got in there, a rifle grenade hit on the windowsill, and we didn't see him anymore. We found a mattress, managed to get under it, and we had a sergeant, a staff sergeant who was our company cook. He started chopping through the floor to get to the basement with a hatchet, and he never did get through there, but he kept working at it. So we spent about a week in that area. We had relieved the 45th Armored Infantry there. They were very glad to see us, so we were a green outfit fresh from the States. We sent our troops out into their positions, and about 2 days later we lost a whole company there. This was in the area of Nancy, France. And one person from that company that I ever saw again somehow got away, but the rest of the company, I guess, were prisoners from then on. This area was called the Lauterborg Bulge. I don't know if many of you have seen the maps of Germany, but the Saar Valley, Saarbrücken, and those go into Germany to a point. And so we had an 84-mile front here, and Jerry was in also that same area. 84 miles of front here and about 42 here into this kind of an arrowhead. So we had, 120 some odd miles to defend with less than a division. and we had too many gaps in them. So when this operation North Wind of Hitler started, they poured through in places. So we had to tighten the lines and really fight back from that area. But it didn't last too long there. The Saar Valley was in this area, which was a disputed territory between the Germans and the French. After every war, it went from one country to the other, but it was the Saar Valley, and Saarbrücken was the center of it. There's a Saar River there, and I suppose where it gets its name. This 42 miles on the Rhine, the west bank of the Rhine there, ran for 42 miles and a point below Strasbourg, France. And it's quite a large front to cover with less than a division of troops. This attack lasted a couple of weeks in that area, and we were pulled back. We lost quite a few men, captured a lot of prisoners. In this town of Philipsburg, France, a tank preceded German troops into town. They thought the town had been secured, and they were behind us, but we were still there. This tank preceded, and we had a little staff sergeant from Texas that never fired a gun that I knew of, but he got on I guess it was a 90 millimeter anti-tank gun and knocked this tank out. And the German troops came filing in down the street singing, riding bicycles, driving cars. And I was amazed by the fact that there were several women with them in this group. And we also had a sergeant that was a house. There was only this one house that I recall out in the middle of this valley where there was a road crossing. Captured 37 Germans. They kept coming in this house, and he's in there. He brought them all out. Here comes this little short sergeant. All these prisoners out in front of him. All they had to do was turn on him, and they're gone. You know, they didn't. Like maybe they were glad it was over. So. Okay, we moved quite often in those days. It seemed like we were either relieved or we were relieving another outfit. And at the time, it was very hard for me to know where I was not privy to the maps. And had I been, I wouldn't have got to use them anyway. But things were moving too fast. So I didn't even basically know where we were. I didn't know where we moved to next, be a few miles up the road, up another mountain or something. And so I lost track. I try to remember the chronology of things back then, and I don't, which I guess doesn't matter that much anyway. But I tried to put it together, and I got awful tired up here trying to figure it out. I never did. So we went up to a town called Haguenau, and we spent a couple of weeks there on the west bank of the Rhine, and a lot of wasn't infiltration so much. It was just more or less an artillery and mortar fire. It wasn't safe to be out in the trees because those tree bursts were deadly. And this is about the time that I was wounded in action. First off, let me say that I was not severely wounded, but if you required first aid and they recorded it, they gave you a Purple Heart. We have so many more men in this town that were severely injured. A lot of them are no longer with us, but I think of Vic Learshot here, who stepped on a personnel mine and lost a leg, and I think, you know, I'm bandaged up a little and I go on. I walk on out on my own. But still, like I say, if you were recorded as being wounded in action, that's how I got a Purple Heart. It's nothing that bothered me at all. Okay, let's see. To go on with that story, we'd been dispatched from the headquarters company. I was in the headquarters company and so-called intelligence section. Now that's a little bit of a misnomer If you're not too bright, you should be in that, because what they let you do is they put you out in front of the front lines to gather intelligence. That's what you're there for. And so it sounded good when I took the job. Anyway, back to this Purple Heart time. We were dispatched to go up and contact another company on top of the mountains. And this is through a barrage of artillery and 8 German 88s, which were a fearsome weapon just from the noise they made. We got up and delivered our message to the company on top of the ridge, and got about halfway down, and we heard incoming, and a pretty steep slope. We all hit the ground on our back. We just put our feet out from under us. And a friend of mine on my left must have took the full brunt of the explosion, because I got hit in the leg and it blew my helmet about 35 feet away, but he stopped it, killed him. So apparently he saved my life, I assume. I think he got the shrapnel instead of me. Well, anyway, we got down. We headed back up on another ridge at that time, and a little lack of communication. A lot of snow on the ground. We'd been issued the white parkas by then. We tried to dig a foxhole up on top there. We got down about 8 or 10 inches, and we hit solid rock. Well, it's tough to dig through. So we dug it long so we could lay down in it. And I'm a sound sleeper, my wife will attest. Anyway, they pulled out during the middle of the night. The Germans were starting to infiltrate, and 3 of us didn't know they moved. So one of us finally woke up and said, "Hey, everybody's gone." I'll tell you what, it don't take long to go down a mountain when there's snow on it. All you gotta do is sit down. So we did. We got out of there in a hurry. Back, and we spent the rest of the night in a pigsty. It seemed like a pretty good place at the time. Weren't any pigs in it. We were in that area until early February. Our next move was up around Saarbrücken, which I said was a contested area between the Germans and the French. First one claimed it and then the other. But the Siegfried line was in this area, and we were on the ridge above the Siegfried line where we could see the tank traps and so forth. And we spent, to the best of my recollection, 3-4 weeks in that area. With every night patrols went down into the town, and every night the Germans came up into our lines, and they'd plant the bazooka charges, put a wire across the road, and a jeep going out at night, they'd blow them. And we also, at that time, a Sherman tank, about 150 yards down a road from the building we were in, was burnt out, had been hit and burnt, and they kept, their fire was too accurate. Their artillery and mortars coming in were so accurate, we couldn't figure how they could be that accurate. Turns out during the night they had infiltrated a spotter in this burnt out tank, and he spent about 3 days in there before we found him. He was putting the mortars right where they're supposed to be, and that gets a little scary when they get that close. I wasn't too bad at that time because I was out in front of him in a bunker there, so he was shooting behind. Wonder, Jim, could I get any water here? I'm talking so much I'm dried out. Another interesting thing about this would have been in the French sector above the Siegfried line was they built underground bunkers, and they would be 2 or 3 stories deep into the ground. Have a small opening in them, but they were pretty flush down under there. They had all the comforts of home and safety from artillery. Thanks, Jim. Frank, I'm glad you made it. I thought you were kidding today when you said you might come. Patton had overextended himself at this time, and so some of our troops, one of the reasons we were spread so thin there, of course, Patton just went. I mean, the heck with supplies and everything else. He went and they had to catch up supplies to him. But he overextended a little bit up towards Bastogne and the Ardennes, and that's why we were spread so thin in this area. And anyway, in the Saarbrücken area, after spending this month or so there, why, Patton had gotten reorganized again and re-outfitted, and he came down from the north and cut this Saarbrücken, this area off. There's quite a number of towns. Once he cut this area off, things changed in a hurry because he was so mobile and moved very fast. Let's see. Hitler had one more push left in him. He called it winter solstice. And he threw about 3 armies in. This was up in the Vichy, whatever, France area. And it was a diversionary tactic, and this basically was his last offensive. Some people thought the Battle of the Bulge was, but it was not. There were 2 more after that. Not on that scale, but you know, the way I see it, anybody that's getting shot at, he's in a war. It doesn't matter how big it is. If it's only 2 men, that's big enough. Back to this Saarbrücken area, we were on the line there for, I think it was right at a month. From then on, things moved so fast. You know, you would move up, I don't know how much in miles, but you'd occupy a town. You would try to get rid of any troops that might be hiding out in the area, take them prisoner, whatever. And they switched to civilian clothes to fool you. So we'd maybe move a day's run, a half a day's run up the road and stay in that town for a few days and scour the surrounding countryside. I remember moving north out of that area, and we eventually got up around Wiesbaden, and this is the Rhine River area, but going up on the Autobahns, the Germans always said that the Americans took less time to go around a blown bridge than it took them to blow it. And I think that was true because the engineers were fabulous. Of course, they had the pontoon boats and so forth. I spent time in this time period down on the Rhine. We had pontoon bridges across, and they had giant searchlights upriver because the Germans had tried to float a raft or even a log with explosives down and blow these bridges. So I got the honor of guarding these for a few days. You also were guarding the light that they didn't knock the lights out. This is quite an area in France. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, the Rhine Valley. And beautiful place. We weren't there too long and moved on up to Limburg. And I always wondered if that's where the Limburger cheese came from. I have no idea for sure. We were in a great number of towns then for maybe another 3 weeks. We just in a town for a few days and on to another one, and I enjoyed this part of it. The fighting had gone on way ahead of us, and we ended up after this time period we got into Frankfurt on the Main, which is only a few miles from Wiesbaden on the Rhine. The Main dumps into the Rhine River there, Wiesbaden, which is now they call it Rhine-Main Air Base. I think it's the air base where you fly into if you're going into Germany. And when we got into Frankfurt, which was a very much bombed out city, this was full of displaced people, slave labor, if you will. A lot of Polish people, a lot of Russians, and we went into 7th Army headquarters, which was a large quadrangle. That's what we call it. It's 4 buildings just closed in with a big parade ground out in the middle. So we started processing these people, getting them ready to head them back east towards home. And we we were there over May Day, which was the Great Russian Holiday. I guess that's their revolution, isn't it? May Day. The Russians, anyway, we were supposed to help them celebrate any way we could. Well, their celebration would not work here because they stole gasoline and drank it. Several of them died from that. And that's a fact. They love to get a hold of what I call hand soap, bath soap. They ate that. They called that sweet lard, and they ate hand soap. Now, their bodies were apparently starved for something that they hadn't gotten for years. And so they were a different breed, those Russians, I'll let you know that. But a little anecdote here. Like I say, we were supposed to help them celebrate, and I had a Jeep. And a couple of them came to me and wanted me to take them. Well, we don't speak the same language by any means, but with gestures and so forth and this, well, you get the idea. And I was pretty scared, really. They got in the Jeep with me. They wanted me to take them out in the countryside. They'd spotted some sheep. I took them out, and they pulled it here and got out. They took off, and pretty here they come back, each one of them carrying a sheep, and they throw it in the Jeep. I take it back, and they butcher it. So that was part of their May Day celebration. And I thought they deserved it, probably. They probably hadn't eaten too well. Another thing in Frankfurt then, things had quieted down quite a bit. And where was I here? Oh, a friend of mine, not basically a friend, but he was in my unit. His name was Gartman, and his grandmother had lived in Frankfurt. And one day he says to me, he said, my grandma lives here. He said, would you go help me find the address? And we did. It was close to the train station, only a few blocks away, which was totaled. We found the pile of bricks. Her grandmother's house was, and as far as I know, I didn't stay with him too much longer after that, but I don't think he ever found his grandmother, whether she had been killed in the raids or moved out before. A thing that I somewhat admired about the German people, even though this town was devastated, the women, the people at home had gotten out, cleaned the bricks, stacked them, and had them ready to rebuild. I admired that trait. And I think that was true throughout that area. A lot of their traits I didn't admire, but I did that. So. Another point that I don't have down here but comes to mind is I mentioned the engineers earlier, and when we went from Wiesbaden into Frankfurt, the Rhine is, I'm going to guess, 100 foot below the grade of the railroads. And in the 3 or 4 days it took us to get there, the engineers had this railroad bridge about half finished already, building it back. They just took cross timbers, and it was like you built a log home, and they had her right up there. It was well over half done already in just a few days. And you wonder how they can manage that fast. I'm sure there's people here that's probably seen that, probably been in that area. This is the only, on the Rhine there, I mentioned the spotlights and guarding the charges coming down the river. It's the only time I ever saw the Navy over there. They had the Navy was there running the ducks, crossing over. And I don't think those Navy guys were too happy that far inland. Frankfurt, anyway, this was, like I say, the Poles and the Russians, we started them home. But we also then, for the first time, were in some contact with the German people. And I don't think that the German people were real unhappy to see us. At least they were civil to us. And under the circumstances, I guess it should have been. We're the conquerors, so that was probably the smart thing to do, but seemed pretty civil to me.
Charlie, did the French people, were they helpful, or did you have any dealings with them, or how did they react?
Never really had a lot of contact. Yes, before the Rhine crossing, we did have a little contact with the French people. And yeah, they would give us food, and they made potato schnapps. They'd offer us schnapps, you know. And I never found the French people to be as friendly as the German people. I'm sure other people found it just the opposite of that, but that was but I got a little German blood. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. By the way, I tried to find relatives over there, and nobody ever heard of a name like mine, so I think it lost a little in the translation. Ellis Islet changed their name, I guess. My granddad came from Germany when he was 3 in 1862, I guess it was, so he never passed much information on, you know. And then, but I got down to Heidelberg. I'll try and remember that later. After Frankfurt, our 70th Division, which was a young division, was disbanded. Some of the troops, we were on a point system, depending on how long you'd been there, how many battles you'd been in, and so forth. And some of the replacements in our unit with a low number of points were, after the unit was disbanded, they went to other units that were preparing to go to Asia. And so I was reassigned to the 3rd Infantry, which, by the way, Audie Murphy was in, and the most decorated unit in the war. Had nothing to do with me. I was late coming, but anyway, the good ones had already moved on. I was only there a couple, 3 weeks, and a friend of mine said one day, he said, you know, I have a cousin down in Heidelberg who's a headquarters company commander down there. He said, let's go down there and talk to him. Maybe he can get us out of here. And so we made a trip down to Heidelberg. I don't know how we got there anymore, but saw his cousin in the headquarters company there at 7th Army headquarters, and sure enough, he got us out of there. We got us both into the PX system there in Heidelberg, where I spent the remainder of my time overseas. And it was a fine deal for me, because we were in the requisitioning end of it, the two of us. We went to Munich for. They were building toy trains in Munich. We went to Switzerland for watches to bring into the PXs, and we had an officers and enlisted PX there that were pretty well supplied, and also in the Heidelberg area, then the two of us started 2 NCO clubs, and we had live music, and of course there were a lot of whacks in the area at that time, and then we had the fun of going out and requisitioning the local wine and so forth for the clubs. And we lived pretty high for a while there. We ate in the best hotels, and we didn't sleep in them, but we drive up the mountain and ate high on the hog. Gosh, this time's going slow. Well, back to Heidelberg. There are lots of Rensselaer people pass through there on the way. I think of Phil Fendig, some of you probably know, and not while I was there, but Doris Alson was stationed there a while. And this headquarters company, 7th Army headquarters, Dean Goad, who passed away just a few years ago, was he was the chef out there, the main cook, whatever, mess sergeant, I guess he called it. So I got, Verlin McCord was another one, who was, Verlin, I guess, Dick Shurick's wife. I think Verlin is her uncle or something. Ken Ford's uncle also. So we ran, it was kind of a crossroads area. Heidelberg was an open city. One bomb exploded in Heidelberg, and that was a mistake. It was declared an open city, and it was a beautiful city, right in the base of the mountains and on the Neckar River, and about 12 kilometers south of Mannheim, which was a large supply center. And as a matter of fact, Patton, General Patton was killed in an auto accident up in Mannheim. And we were up there that day bringing back some loads of cigarettes or something for the PXs. They tried to make something out of it like it was a deliberate thing, but I think nothing ever came of that. It was an accident. That's what they are. The Germans in this quadrangle where they had 7th Army headquarters they had stables there with horses, and I learned to ride a horse there. We had a little free time, I guess that proves. So even we had tailors in the PX that would build you a suit or whatever. So I had a suit made out of the olive drab, do a fine job, but that color didn't go over too good back here. But excellent tailor. They're great craftsmen. The Germans. It's not like our educational system. Those people they start before school. They take schooling and then they serve apprenticeship for years. So they got some age on when they ever graduate from that step. But they are good at what they do. I spent about 10 months in Heidelberg. We also at that time, I don't know how we got elected, my friend and I from Detroit, but we got material in and we opened a soda fountain, first one in the area. That always amazed me. I never knew how those operated. They just send in a bunch of powder and you mix water with it and you got ice cream, That wasn't the way we made ice cream at home. But it was an interesting experience there. And falling back a ways, when we were down in the Rhine Valley there, we stayed in some German homes. The German homes, the farm villages, they have the village and then the farmers go out to farm. The houses are not on the land. They all go out from the village, but the house we stayed in, or the town even, was all undermined with a basement where they stored fruits, vegetables, and they had their big wine cask. But where we slept was right over the cattle. And there's a purpose to that. This is tight, but the heat, the body heat from the animals helps to heat the living quarters. And they're so clean that there's no smell. It's unbelievable, but it's true that there's very little smell there involved. I had a good time in Heidelberg. Got to see a lot of the country. Down to Munich, Stuttgart. Saw the castle in Cologne, and a fella from St. Louis and I got to take a leave to the British Isles and spend some time in London, up to Edinburgh, and it wasn't all bad. Once the shooting stopped, it was pretty good for you. I'm about to run out of time here, but my point system came up. And, they tried to talk me into staying a little longer, but I was ready to come home. So on the 1st of May in 1945, I started about a month's journey home. All through Germany on trains out to Le Havre, France, and onto a boat. Got on a little victory ship home, and it's pretty much like a rowboat on those big waves. And that's about my journey. If I could answer a question for anybody, I'd try.
Charlie, I wonder if you'd go back to where you were wounded. That shell went off next to you.
Yes.
You kind of brushed by that. Were you just treated and sent out that same day? Why don't you tell us, because we heard from old Priatula last week about medical care.
Well,
what happened?
I was only treated by a medic. They usually throw a little sulfa drug in the wound and bandage it up, and I guess it gave me a new pair of boot packs. It cut the top off my boot pack, and I walked back to wherever I had to go. So with me, it was not a big thing. I've never made a point of it, and it was. But like I said, anytime you were through enemy action, if you got a wound that went to first aid, they recorded it. So, I don't know what else to tell you about it, Jim.
I guess the other question I had, talking with some of the other veterans, what was it like coming back home? Not only your feelings, but how were you received back in
Well, I think, of course, now you have to realize that a lot of them were home when I got here with I had 35 points or some of them were up to, in the 50s, so I was, the war had been over practically a year when I came home. But I do recall pulling into Le Havre, France on the train and seeing the ship there with the French war brides with lines strung all across the ship and baby diapers hanging on, and clothes hanging on all the lines. But coming home, I remember the joy, whatever exhilaration of seeing the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. And then we pulled into Brooklyn Naval Yard and got on a train for New Jersey, which was just another step on the way home. And but it was kind of like the Golden Gate Bridge, I think, in California, getting home. When you see that, you know you're home. And I was ready to go home. So.
You said something about tree burst, explosion type.
Yes, mortars hit the trees, and you're under there. The closest I got, I had a rifle splintered and knocked out of my hand one time in a bunker in a group of trees, and they sent in, I assume it was an 88 mortar. And when that explodes, when it hits a tree, and it just showers it. It's just like rain coming down. So, if they go in and hit the ground, well, it's outward. But up here, it's like an umbrella. Is that close enough to explain it to you? Yeah, this is what happened in the Ardennes. This is why it was so bad. It's such a deep forest. They cut the trees with gunfire. They mowed the trees down, but the artillery hit the trees, and then it just covered a great amount of space on the ground. So,
Charlie, what date did you actually get back to Rensselaer? Do you recall?
it was about the end of May, but I can't tell you the exact date. I think it was like the 31st. I think I just spent 45. Yeah. See, I farmed for a year, Paul, before I went over. My class, most of them were gone, and of course, the situation with my mother on the farm, so I farmed 1 year before I went in.
Yeah.
And I gave up a deferment to try to enlist in the Air Corps. I went to Chicago for physicals and so forth, but they were firing them out of there like mad. Most of my friends in the military had been in the Air Corps, and kicked out because they had more than they wanted. So that's generally what was in the outfit I was in. So yeah, I was just a month from the time I left Heidelberg until I got home here.
Did you say you were in a year after the war?
I was in, the war ended in May and I got out in the next May, yes.
Okay, so that would have been 46 then. I don't know if that's what you were getting.
Oh, yeah, yes, May of 46. I guess I said 45. Yes, May of 46.
Charlie, I have two questions. Did you enlist then, or were you drafted?
No, when I tried to enlist in the Air Corps, I gave up my deferment, and then I was drafted.
Okay, that's what I thought you meant.
Yes.
The other question were you horribly frightened during
I was
this
scared to death.
Yeah, okay. Can you tell us a little more about your feelings? I mean, what it was like?
You're petrified.
Petrified.
Time stands still. I'm talking about this first day, clear back in Philipsburg, France, when we were surrounded. And, the mountains are right over the houses. And then across this valley was 250, maybe 300 yards wide, no more than that. But they could get on this mountain on the other side and shoot right into the window of the house. Well, they were lobbing rifle grenades across there and hitting on the window. This is when the colonel I mentioned found a mattress to get under there, and the cook, the mess sergeant, started chopping through the floor.
So did you have a feeling like, this is the end, I've had it?
Pardon me again?
Did you have a feeling of, like, this is it, this is the end?
No, you're immortal when you're 18 or 19
Well,
years old.
yeah.
You are, That's why they have 18 and 19-year-olds in the military. They don't put old folks in there. My unit, the intelligence unit with the battalion, it was just battalion intelligence, and I had a fellow from Ashland, Kentucky, one from West Milton, Ohio, over by Troy. And they were family people. They both had, one had 4 kids, the other 5, I think. So they were more aware of things than I was. They had a fear that I didn't have, and I understand that. I have gone on some patrols that they were slated for because I was feeling for them. And not that I wasn't trying to be a hero, but they were friends and they had those kids at home, so there were a few times I went out for them. So, but yes, fear. They say the greatest heroes had all kind of fear, but they did it in spite of the fear. And so it's like the guy I mentioned earlier, when the German tank's coming down the street, he gets behind a gun out here in the middle of the street and stops the tank. He was probably scared, but he was there anyway, and he was pretty well exposed. So I think in spite of that. Yeah. This was, by the way, this was the coldest winter that Europe had known in many years. We were finally issued a little sleeping bag that rolled up in a roll about that big, filled with down, and you could sleep out in 20 below weather in that thing if you were in a position to use it and stay warm. So in spite of that cold weather, it was amazing. You put things under you and sit on top of you to keep it from melting into the frost or whatever.
Charlie, what do you do when, like when you're in close combat? What about meals and things like that?
Comes in a little box, Gene, about that long and about that big a square. Nothing worse than beef in a can that's cold. Tallow sticks to the roof of your mouth. But it had cheese and it had like a Spam in it, so that kind of stuff was very edible. Chocolate, had a chocolate bar.
Did you eat that just whenever you had a chance?
Yes.
You don't tell the other side, wait, time out?
No. Didn't all go eat at 12 o'clock. Not like that. No. But we, generally you tried to give some of that away. You didn't want to have to eat it. They did have a little can that had something that burned it, and if you were in a position to do so, you lit this and it would, you could heat it with it. But, you didn't have that opportunity too often. You weren't in a place where you could do it. You got by. I gained weight. Been gaining ever since. Yeah.
Shirley, you mentioned Germans.
Pardon me?
You mentioned taking some Germans as prisoners.
Yes?
What happened to those Germans as they were captured?
They were taken to the rear, Jeff, and then I have no idea. Probably some of them, I imagine, they took to regimental headquarters and interrogated them. Something that I didn't have down here, I recall, this was on the Siegfried Line. They captured, one of the patrols had gone into this Saarbrücken at night, and they brought back an SS troop. Most of your run-of-the-mill soldiers in the German army were folks like us, but they always had SS in every unit behind them, making sure they'd fight. They captured an SS one night on a raid into this town, and for some reason I got elected to take him back to regimental headquarters. Well, I was issued a carbine, and we were taking him back in a Jeep. So one of the GIs there said, "Here, take this. You don't want to be him in the back seat, me in the rider's side in the Jeep. Take this," and he hands me a grease gun. You have an idea what that is? Little machine gun, cheaply made. So all the way back to regimental, I'm turned around in the passenger side in the Jeep, keeping an eye on this SS behind me, and he keeps looking at this gun. I wonder what the heck's going on here, He's weighing his chances. When we get down there and get rid of him, turn him over, I get to looking at this grease gun this GI handed me, and the barrel's rammed full of mud. That guy's weighing his chances. Is that going to explode and get me too, or just him? That's the way I felt. So that didn't do me any favor when he handed me that grease gun.
When you said you were out in front of the other troops, did that mean you were infiltrating the German lines, or what?
Basically, it was observation posts. The only other people out with us might be artillery spotters. And a lot of artillery spotters were in the little Cub planes or something like that, depending on the terrain. But no, maybe we were 100, 150 yards out in front of, we were a first line, hey, they're coming, you know. We got a radio in there, a phone back to the company to alert the company that they're coming in or something. But we were 100, 150 yards out in front of the riflemen. I was, by the way, in a rifle division, infantry division. So, although we had an A&P platoon that found a Sherman tank with the tread blown off one time, and those guys repaired that thing, and from then on we had a tank in our units. So, those guys worked awful hard getting that running, but they got it working. So. Anybody else?
You was talking about that SS. There was SS they had, and once they got captured, they wasn't out of the woods yet. They marched a bunch of these prisoners back. Some SS. You know, it's funny how
The prisoners were alerting you.
yeah, they're pointing out that SS.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those SS got so they'd break and run.
Out of the ranks.
Yeah, not very far.
Yeah, not. Somebody's looking, huh?
But when they did it, those other prisoners just clapped their hands.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always after I got into the PX after the war was over, there were several young Germans in there, and you know, we were not unfriendly with each other. There was no animosity. And I talked to them, and they said, "Well, we feel we're a little like you were. We were drafted. You know, we're not. The Wehrmacht was that way. You had the elite troops, and they were pretty much political, but the average were not. They were drafted like a lot of us. I think that's true."
Very real nice. Gerald Pettet was a prisoner of war for a fair length of time in World War II. Retired farmer. Jerry, you're on.
Thank you. Good evening. My wife helped me out. She made me some notes. I know I can read them if I don't get too shook up here. Phil Wood asked me to do this, and I said, I can't speak in public. He said, well, good, just talk. So that's what we'll try to do, just talk. I've always heard to be a good speaker, you have to be sincere, be brief, and be seated. In that order. So that sounds like the way to go, but I don't know how brief we can be here and get it all in. I was graduated from Wheatfield High School, 1940, and went to the service on October the 21st in 42. Left from Rensselaer on the old Monon, and about 8 o'clock at night. Went to Fort Bend. Didn't take long. Before morning, I was on KP already. I didn't think that was the way to greet a person, but anyhow, you get to learn all the ropes in a hurry. I would like to say something about, maybe I shouldn't, but you remember Ed that used to be the radio man for Jerkin Islands and Sears and Roebuck? Remember him? I'm sure a lot of you do. Well, he went the same night. And poor Ed was so disgusted and so mad, and I sat right across from him from the aisle on the train, and so I really got an earful. And he had a right to be. I thought that system is just not right. He was 55 years old. He was living with his mother. She was 90 years old. He couldn't get in World War II, because he said, I tried and I weighed 110 pounds. He said, I weigh 95 pounds now, and I get drafted. He was really disgusted. And I thought, well, this is He had a reason to be disgusted, I think, because 55 years old, I thought that was an old man at that time. Anyhow, I was down to Fort Bend, and the next day after we were there, we got issued clothes and shots and took tests to see how we were qualified to do what. And Ed was in line to get his clothes when I was. And he had 2 duffel bags full of clothes, and there had no way could he carry them. So I thought I'd just leave them set up, bring them back to him. Well, luckily, Ed got shipped off before I did, and I had to carry his duffel bags to the truck, and they took him to the train for him. I often wondered how Ed came out, and I thought about him all the time I was in. So I asked when I got out, I inquired and found out he was working for Jurgen or he was working at Sears, I guess, at that time. And I went to see him. And he said it kept him for a couple of years over in Ohio, doing radio repair work, and a teacher. And he wasn't near as mad as he was when he went in. And I'm happy about that. Anyhow, after we got our shots and they issued everything and their clothes, and 4 or 5 days later, well, we got orders to get our duffel bags down to the train, and we were going to ship out. There were fellows there from Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And so many of it from each state were put on this troop train that I was on, and we made up a company. And we went to Arizona with our ODs on. And we had to walk about a mile from the station. It's a brand new camp. I'm in Florence, Arizona. You've ever been over Florence?
It's out in the middle of the desert.
And time we got to the camp with ODs on, everybody was wet with sweat and pooped, you know. And I thought, this is the end of the world. But Arizona was all right. I liked it. When we left it, I liked it better. Because when you go to a place like Arizona to Alabama, the humidity about kills you. Well, we were made up the 376th Military Police Escort Guard Company. And after our basic, we started getting prisoners, and that's what our camp was for, was to guard prisoners of war. And we guarded Italians and a few Germans, but mostly Italians. Some of them were nice prisoners, some of them were terrible. I think we got a bunch of bad actors. We had to, at one point, we took the bad ones, got them, and told them we were going to take them out in the desert and draw a circle out there on the ground, and they better take their clothes because they were going to stay. They weren't going to come back. Oh, they were mad, but they went, and you couldn't do anything with them. You couldn't help them. They were just determined they were going to, they were going to give everybody a bad time. They're going to make you miserable because that was their privilege. The Geneva Conference said they could, the convention, And they wanted to live by that and more. Well, anyhow, after about a week or 10 days out there, first they cut inching out to the line, and we had orders before not to never even hit them because of that Geneva Convention. But after you couldn't plead with them, you couldn't reason with them, after a couple shots, on the feet, on a couple of them, they found out that they meant business, and then they started acting like human beings. A short time after that, 373rd was made up for boys from Boston and Tennessee. Now there's a combination if you want to if you want to see a lot of fights. But anyhow, they needed some for it because they were going up to northern Arizona, about north of Winslow, in the Navajo Indian Reservation territory to Carnegie. Jap Americans. And they needed some more, so about 8 of us from Indiana, volunteered to go along. And maybe 10. Anyhow, this was way out in the middle of nowhere. These Jap Americans it was an old Indian school, what it used to be. And had a big dormitory and heating system and a mess hall. But these here Japs that we had were from San Francisco. Jap Americans. And they weren't mean, but they were told them that they were there for their own protection. Maybe that was so, I don't know. But shortly after they got there around that time, well, there was a whole battalion or regiment, maybe you've ever heard about that, of Indians getting killed over in somewhere in the islands by the Japanese. And they were these Indians would come in out of the desert in their wagons and you had to keep them away from these Japs. The Japs weren't going nowhere because out there was no place to go, for miles and miles to a railroad even. And these Indians wanted to get a hold of them. They remembered that they had it in for them. But they weren't Jap soldiers at all, but they were Japanese, and they didn't understand the difference. They were Japs, and they wanted some of them, wanted part of it, Well, anyhow, after 6 months or so of that, we had to load them on a train and took them up to Klamath Falls, Oregon, where there were more of them. And we went back to Florence, Arizona. One Sunday, I was in the barracks. Several of us were in the barracks. But we were writing letters and rest polishing our boots. And officer of the day came in and he volunteered me and another person to get ready. We were going to go over to another internment camp where they kept families, the Japanese families that they'd brought in, complete families, and they'd made an internment camp for them, and they'd had little homes built for them, and it was beautiful. They'd taken this, and they had water for them, and they made irrigation, and they'd taken this desert and this camp, and they had the most beautiful flowers and little gardens. That was Jap Americans, and I didn't think that was, they were Jap Americans, but they were Americans, and they had them interned. Well, anyhow, this one officer of the day said, there's an American soldier over there, say WOL, you go get him. And so me and this other fellow, and there'll be an ambulance here to pick you up pretty soon. So many minutes and you'll be ready. And so we were, this other fellow and I. And about 40 miles from there, over the other side of Casa Grande, out in the middle of nowhere, where this, first time I'd been there, was internment camp. And we had the address of his parents. And I went up to the door and I said, asked him if this is where so-and-so lived. And he, yes. Do you have the son? Yes. Is he here? No. Little Japanese woman. Yeah, I said, you sure he's not here? Yeah. I said, well, do you mind if we look? And so we stepped back out the door and we looked over the house. And all except the bedroom. When I'm not happy to go to people's bedrooms or in their home either without being invited, but anyhow. I walked in the bedroom at the last resort and looked around. Closets. No soldier. And I was ready to leave and I got down and looked under the bed and there he was. And I asked him if he would come out, and he came out. I said, you know your AWOL? And he said, yes. And I says, I don't blame you. That was serious. Here he was in the American Army, and they had his folks locked up. And they were very discouraged, and I thought, this is no way to treat her. If my parents was locked up under guard, would I be very happy to be in the Army? Well, anyhow, that was not the point. My feelings didn't count. We took him to Globe, Arizona, to the jail, and I suppose he either went back to his camp out east, or I'm sure he didn't get discharged. He might have got the guardhouse for a while. Anyhow, wasn't long after that till a order came out for this camp that they would like to have some volunteers for infantry or paratroopers. And so I volunteered for the paratroopers. I thought, discarding prisoners is, you kind of feel like you'd like to do a little bit more than that. And of course I got the infantry. You never get what you volunteer for in the Army. And several of us were shipped to Camp Rooker, Alabama. And that was an awful letdown from Arizona, the humidity. And they did our maneuvers in a state park that had been condemned because of rattlesnakes. Oh, it was hot, hottest months of the year. And they took us on a forced march one day right after lunch. And every time they got to stopping every 30 minutes instead of an hour for a break, and maybe half a dozen people wouldn't be able to get up. They'd be out. And they had all the trucks and all the ambulances, the 66 Division, all in people's passed out. And I heard that 3 people died out of that. The general of this army division, we all call him, thought he was one of Hitler's right-hand men, because it looked like he was trying to kill everybody before he could oversee. Well, anyhow, after about 3 months of that, a bunch of us were picked to be replacements, sent overseas. We didn't know where, but we knew they shipped us from there to out to New York, and we knew we were going to go to Europe. That's where we were going. We wouldn't go anywhere else. And so they loaded, when they got enough personnel there, and I don't know how long they were there, a few days, 20,000 men and nurses, not near that many nurses, and all of your equipment on the Queen Mary. And we went across the ocean, zigzag. And the Queen Mary was the fastest ship, I guess, in the fleet, if any fleet. And I guess they said the zigzag was for your protection, the subs couldn't get a beat on you. Well, anyhow, we got across all right and landed. And I'll tell you this, we got into a storm going over, and the Queen Mary is one tremendous big ship, about a quarter of a mile long. And there's so many men on there that they couldn't keep them all down below. They had half of them stayed up on deck, and this next night you'd go down, the others would come up. We got into a storm, and water was washing over the top of the Queen Mary. And the next day it was still that way. And there was a fishing fleet, I suppose, out here. 3 little boats, sailboats. And I see them in the distance, they'd be up in the sky, And then they'd disappear. Well, they went under, And it seemed like forever. And out they'd come again. Oh, I can just imagine how everybody lost their cookies on there. But anyhow, when it quieted down, they were still there. And we got landed over by Ireland. And took us by boat to England. And we was in England a week or two. Got talked Eisenhower. Ike was there, and very nice gentleman. And he was just as common as any buck private could possibly be, and wished us all well. And from there, we crossed the English Channel. I've got some notes here, and I haven't even looked at any yet. I might be missing something. Anyhow, we landed at Omaha Beach, and I want to tell you, I don't know how the Americans made it up to Omaha Beach. It was all over when we got there. I mean, the invasion was. And we walked up on the high ground, up past the German pillboxes, and all the German, what were they called? Put out in the wire to stop the Americans. Yeah. And I really don't know how they made it, but they did, thank goodness. There was a lot of lives lost, and we didn't realize how many lives was lost till we got up on top of the hill. And there was about 2 40-acre fields of white crosses. Then it gets to you, finally hits you that it was just as bad as we heard it was. And I don't know how many there were in them, but they're these cemeteries, but they had them lined up, beautiful crosses in line. But anyhow, it was an awful lot of misery in this, I know that. And from there, they just kind of kept us on the move, because so many, they started out our whole group. Well, it was more than that, because they came from other places besides. But everybody that landed was put on trains, and we started, after we'd walked so far, we put on trains, and they started moving us towards Nancy, France, and on east. Well, 3 of us ended up, the last 3 in this group, ended up as replacements in the 26th Division, Infantry Division. Yankee Division was it was a, I guess in World War I, the Yankee Division was noted for being a top division. Had a lot of praise, did a lot of good. Was in the 3rd Army, Patton's Army. And we started up, when we got there, well, it was about evening. And as far as days goes, I never paid any attention to days, because I wasn't living my life. Some people were living it, you know. And we had to get to our division. They were at the front. They were in action. And this is an awful change. You know, you go from being somebody to being cannon fodder. And we walked up, had to go up this hill. And they was bringing the dead Americans down, and the Germans everywhere. And that night, after just about dark, about dark, but they had 3 rows of foxholes dug. Oh, I don't know how long. But they were staggered. You can realize, you understand, I know a lot of you do. And there was room for 2 people in these. And so I ended up with a kid from Michigan. And we got this foxhole, and it was half full of water, or not half full, but had about a foot of water in it. It was snowing and bit missing rain and miserable. And we were supposed to stay there all night because the Germans was just right close. See that they didn't infiltrate. And this lasted for more than one night, but anyhow, this first night, well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I hope I can tell this, but he says, you got to get me out of here. I'm froze, my feet's froze, I'm froze clear to my knees. And he weighed about 240 pounds, he's big too. And I said, I don't know if I can. He said, well, you've got to. I said, I don't know where to take you. He says, I know, back to the CP. And I said, well, where's the CP? He said, I know. You know, I just got there. I didn't know anything. It's just like throwing a cow in with another herd of cattle. You did that before. You know, they get bumped around. You don't know nothing. Anyhow, I took my rifle, bayonet. It was on it, shoved it in the ground, and worked and worked. We finally got him out. Got him back to the CP. They said, some people was in there, and he said, come on in and have some coffee. And, oh, it smelled good, and it was warm, you know. But what had happened, I got about 20, 30 feet from where we started from. I was out of the way of the foxholes, was past them, and it dawned on me I'd forgotten my rifle. And that's a sin, you know. You forget your baby, you know. That's your life. And I knew that I couldn't get back and get it, because if I let him down, he's going to fall in the mud. So I thought, well, I'll get back here in a hurry. And so I got him back there, and they invited me in for coffee, but I refused because I had this rifle on my mind. I got to get back to that. There was fires in the back of us where the Americans were shooting artillery. The Germans were shooting artillery at us, and it was going over our heads all night. And I started back, and I got her out past this hedgerow, and I tell you, I got so completely disoriented, I didn't know where I was. I mean, I was lost, man, scared. Because I knew if I stepped another step, I could end up in a foxhole onto somebody's bayonet was sticking up there. And I said, what am I going to do to myself? And pretty soon, believe this or not, a voice said to me, follow me. Well, I didn't have any other thing to do. Followed anybody. But I think it was another angel looking after me. Anyhow, I started walking, and they just steered me, and I went a step or two this way and a step or two that way. Got around these foxholes. I couldn't see nothing. And I got back to where I'd left my rifle, and this voice said, reach up with your left hand, or your right hand. And I did, and I didn't go like this. And there it was, right where I'd left it. And I jumped down that water hole, and I felt pretty good about it. And a few days after that, well, we got orders that it was going to, from Pat, they said that, and sent up orders that we had to go 20 miles to the lower river. I didn't sound like much, 20 miles. But anyhow, the Shermans were just a little ways from us, and our company was going to be on the right flank, and another company was going to be on the left flank of this town, and the tanks were going to come down the middle of town on the road because everything was flooded. The Germans seemed all the dams were broke and everything. And we came down, and we had to leave about 3 o'clock the next morning. And you couldn't see anything that night either. But you look up and you see these tanks for like for miles that was going down to be up where we were going to be by daylight. And I thought, man, it was nothing to worry about. All this firepower here, and they... Well, to make a long story short, the tanks couldn't get to the road. It was so wet, and they all... But we didn't know that. And so we did what we were told to do, which was the wrong thing to do. But we got started to where we, to the edge of this here town, one side of this town, and it was probably 5 or 6 miles, maybe a little more, maybe 10, I don't know. Anyhow, there was Germans all along the way, and some of them got killed, and some of our boys got killed. And by the time we got, but this time, when you get up about the edge of the town, all the people in front of me weren't able to go anymore, or weren't able, and so I guess it's kind of a known fact. You work your way up, what's left, and so here I am. I'm on the point of this spearhead of this company, and I get down to about a ravine, and I hear a German tick 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 wireless towing on, and I've got about far enough, and I motioned it back and told the rest of them behind me what was up here. About this time, the Germans must have seen me, some of them, and a mortar shell started, and I started digging. You know how you can dig with a little shovel. You can dig with it. The ground is about this hard. But I got a good start. And I had a bad habit of not putting my helmet strap under my chin. You had the helmet liner and your helmet over the helmet. And it fell off. And I was digging so fast trying to get a hole to crawl into. And something said, put that back on your head. And in my mind, I just stopped and put it back on my head. And I didn't get my hands down yet till shrapnel hit me, right in the center. I didn't know that at the time, but I knew my hand. I had a headache, and my hand was ringing and stinging. And the rest of them was, and the company commander, CP, there was an old barn there. And, German houses in that the barn was below, and the house was on top. People lived up above. Well, the people all moved out. And our company was in there. I didn't know that because I wasn't looking back. I was just going forward. And they motioned for me to come back there. And I didn't get back there. And they started pouring out there. Well, no, I'm ahead of my story. And we saw these tanks coming down the road through town. And somebody said, "That's not American tanks, them's 88s." And they told their company commander, "Oh, no, them's American tanks." Well, they weren't American tanks. And they had cut us off, and there's no way we could get back. But the company commander said, "Run for it." Well, that's what we did. And they opened up on us with the tanks. They had their machine guns on top, and they just slaughtered us. Out of, I'd say 180 that morning, it was only about 30 of us that was left alive. Involved. And we started to run for it. Anyhow, we were running, and I jumped into a hole. A shell was made. And I was chewing gum because we just had some K rations. I about choked to death. Scared too, don't believe it. But they was just shooting, and the dust was just coming down off of this here hole I jumped in, hitting me on the neck. And I looked out of corner of my eye, and one of the sergeants who says, "Come on, you better give up." And well, I gave up. And by the time I got up and looked around, there's several of them giving up. Well, that was that or get shot, because we were down to 30 people out of 180. And we got up to the tanks where they were, and They wanted our chocolate and our cigarettes and our rifles, and we didn't know what to expect, But we had captured a German just a little while before that, and he had been shot in the hand, and we medic doctored him up and treated him nice, and we tried to ask questions, interrogate him for some information that didn't hurt him, but we got captured shortly thereafter. And he told that how good we were to him, so they treated us good. I mean, there's no beating us around or threatening or anything. They were armored division, what they were. And there happened to be another shed close by, so they put us in there, the 30 of us, till dark. And this old farmer had stored apples in there, so we ate apples. And good thing we did, because that's the last we had for 2 days. And anyhow, at night, when it got dark, they emptied the shed and got us out. And, well, it wasn't dark, it was just getting dark. And this one fellow that I had taken to the CP with his legs frozen, he got shot in the leg, but he was able to drag his leg and get up to where we were. And we tore off a door off of this barn and put him on it and carried him. That turns carried him back after they'd taken us, marching us back. But after we started to march away, it was about dark. And here was laying all of the wounded and the dead out here. And we started waking. They started hollering for help. They couldn't stand up. I mean, some of them get on their knees. They was all bad shape. That was probably as bad a thing as I ever had to do. Walk away from it. Anyhow, we had this one medic. And they marched us all night in water. And the next morning, they said, before we got to this here town, and I don't know how far we walked, but we never stopped all night. The guards would take turns and they'd bring in new guards, but we'd have to keep going. The next morning, a guard said, we're going to march you into this town. And there's going to be some women out here to greet you. And I don't want anybody stepping out of line, or you're going to get shot. So we come into this here town. Here's a bunch of women standing along the edge of the highway with kids. I mean, little children. The bigger kids were in the camps. And they had told them for propaganda purposes that he captured a bunch of Americans. And these are the swine that's been bombing you, and killing your husbands and your boyfriends. So we didn't get a very welcome reception. They started calling us swine and spitting on us and throwing rocks at us. And they said, don't you, if they throw anything at you, don't you flinch, shake it right under. And they didn't care what size the rocks were. Anything they could pick up. Well, and I can understand their feeling to a degree. They didn't know that we didn't start this war. We weren't in it because we wanted to be. But we were the goats. We're the ones that they let their frustrations out on, their anger. Anyhow, they got through town and they put us in a barn full of hay till the next morning, and then they started marches in the daytime. And we'd marched, and then still no food. And we were getting hungry, but that didn't make any difference. They didn't care. We'd see C-46s fly over us when they was marching us. Our planes, we'd wave at them and then dip their wings a little. I thought, man, that's a life. But there was a lot of pilots that never made it either. Their planes were shot down. We know that. I know that. Anyhow, this went on for 2 days, and finally they took us into, walked into a town, and they put us in a big tall building, right by the edge of a railroad yard, Swiss yard. And we really got interrogated one at a time. We walked in this here one room. Here stood about half a dozen German officers dressed up in their armor hanging on them. You walked in there and they had, what's your name? What company you with and all this? What division? And you know what you say. Name, rank, and serial number. And that's all the information you give them. And the Xerxes big saber out, and I want the answer. And he backed it down, and boy, he got mean. Maybe he does mean this, but you don't tell him anything. And he said, you're a good soldier when he gets done. And calls in another one, you go back out. And they went through the whole bunch of them that way. Nobody told them anything that I know. Of course, I didn't know anything. I didn't even know what company I was in for sure. I wasn't around that long. Anyhow, they want to know where this division was, or that regiment, or where the paratroopers were at. I didn't know nothing where the 82nd was. Finally, they congratulate you, like, for not telling them anything. Well, when they got all done, they gave us the first thing they gave us when we got captured was a little hand washable. Remember those little hand you used to wash your hands in the farm? You know, they weren't very big, about this deep. It was your wash basin, you know, at home. Well, this was our plate. That's what we ate out of. Every prisoner got one of them and a spoon. And that was right after we got captured. And they filled this thing about this wash basin about half full. It looked awful good, and it was good. You know, when you're hungry, anything's good. It looked like barley with the hulls off of it. Stew, like we cook rice. And we ate that. We had it in us for 5 minutes. Went right through. Not a kidding you. 5 minutes. Didn't do us a bit of good. I guess because you're so empty. Well, that was a kind of a joke. They happened to have two bathrooms up there. While we were up there, the Americans bombed this here switch yard. And this old building just swapped back and forth. The Germans took it all, except a couple cars they left us. And we thought that we'd go to fall down, you know. But it stood. And when the raid got over, well, they let us out and went a little farther to a camp. And we stayed there for, I don't know, I'll say a week. And they gave us cards to write home and tell our folks where we were. They didn't tell us what to say, but they said these will be to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross will see that your parents or your wife or whoever gets your card. Well, my folks got mine in April. I found out. I sent it in November, yeah. So that wasn't too good a service. But anyhow, and I guess they did, and I told them how we were being treated all right. I didn't want anybody to go there. Didn't get blamed. But I said, you go to the Red Cross and they'll tell you what to do. And I'm sure they sent parcels. I know they did. I know other people did. We never got it. I'm sure that the Germans were hungry too. And I might not say it again, the Red Cross, I was never, I didn't think I thought too much of the Red Cross. But they sent millions and millions of food parcels over there. We didn't get them. Germans got most of them because they were the ones that was at first choice, you know. Because after the war, we will, as I'll get to later when we walk back, we'd come to switch yards that were just, everything had been raided, and these Red Cross parcels out of the boxes, you know. Millions of them were empty. They'd been used and discarded. None of the soldiers did it or the civilians did it. And I have no fault with that because they were starving to death too. Anyhow, let's see, what was I going to ask? I got sidetracked. Talk with me.
You were in that
Oh,
tall
we got
building.
the barley, yeah. And we went to this other camp, and that's where we wrote our letter, our card, and was there for a few days and into another camp. These were old. A lot of these were old prison camps. The smell was terrible. I think they were, you know, extermination camps. I think they were exterminating a lot of people. The smell was terrible. And a lot of us had the frozen feet. Mine weren't so bad. I just had a few toes that were black. But everybody complained to the Germans about frozen feet. Go over, lay down on the floor and put your feet up in the air on the side of the building. And so all the way around the buildings where we were would be soldiers with their feet up in the air. Evidently that did some good because mine finally got all right. Some of them lost their feet, but evidently that's good medicine. If you freeze your feet, just lay on the floor, put your feet up in the air. And finally they sorted us out, a bunch of us out of kids. About 130, 60? I forgot. I got it written down here. Well, I thought about it, but I haven't looked at this for so long for a man. Anyhow, forget it. They took us to this was in the evening, afternoon, to this railroad. Well, no, I'd say, I'm getting ahead of the story. At Thanksgiving, we got a full parcel, Red Cross parcel, which had a can of Spam and a can of jelly and a can of condensed milk and some chewing gum and 4 cigarettes and another thing or two, not very big, but a very good package. A lot of food, a lot of you could buy. And so we had a good Christmas with the full parcel. Thanksgiving. Well, we moved to another camp, and at that camp, by Christmas time, we got a half a pack parcel. We were farther away. And after Christmas, they loaded several of us up. As I said, 120 or 30. 180, did you say, Helen? She wrote it down. She wrote it down on the question card. I told her what to do. Anyhow, we didn't know where we were going, and they didn't care, really. It wasn't good if we had it. But they took us down here, and Charlie told you about the 40 and 8 car. Well, they put us in, I think they must have put 60 in the car. We had to stand up. Couldn't even sit down. All at once, you took turns. And they put a 5-gallon honey bucket in here. You know what a honey bucket is? And this train didn't move until 12 hours later. And there we sat. And it would move a little ways and then it would stop. And it'd move a little farther, it'd pull over on the side, you could hear another train go by. Oh my. Anyhow, we got this here camp, prisoner of war camp in communist Czechoslovakia. I tell you, we weren't hungry anymore, we were thirsty. Hunger is nothing compared to thirst. But we were 5 nights and 4 days in this train. And there was about a foot of fresh snow on the ground when they let us out. So we knew a lot of that snow disappeared. We ate snow by the handful. And they took us then to march us to this camp where we were going to be. We were going to work in, we found out we were going to be city workers, some of us, and they were going to be a mine close by. Some of them were going to work there. Well, got picked as one. There was 8 of us got picked to work in the city. And I was one of them. And thank goodness for that. Anyhow, we went to work. Old Pop took us. We had a guard named Old Pop. Well, he's probably 65 years old. I won't tell you how old I am. But we called him Pop because he was a very nice old German. And he was our guard. And he took us, marched us up here this Monday morning to go to work. And he said, we got to meet the Teamster here. And the Teamster, come to find, I figured we'd see a truck coming up, you know. Well, we saw a team of horses coming up. And it was a nice team, and I always liked horses. And so they drove up, this big, tall Czech drove us up there and stopped, and I walked over and started petting these horses and all. And he had to have a helper, come to find out, so he picked me, because I was the only one to pay any attention to his horses. And they're pretty precious to them, to the horses. And so in a few days, he asked Pop if he could take me home with him for lunch. And Pop said yes. Well, we just got stuck. We went home, put his horses up, fed him, went in the house. He had a wife and a kid, 3 or 4 years old. And they had soup. They didn't have the food to give us, but anyhow, Jock and I, his name was Jock, we got kind of, you get close, you know. And he took me home and introduced me to his wife. She had the soup ready, you know, potatoes, and very good. I put my plate out, my bowl, and put it there. And we ate that, and it was beautiful. We sat in the house, you know, no guards around. But pretty soon, Americans went over. And here comes poor old Pop Wonder, afraid I was going to get away. And he was, you know, it had been his responsibility if I had gotten away. He would have got that treatment. Anyhow, that took care of that. No more of that. And wasn't long, so there was no more a Jock either. We found out we were getting too close. And so we put on another Jock. He was a Czech. He wasn't no German. He didn't say Heil Hitler to anybody. But everybody else was Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. And they had us shoveling snow off of the streets, hauling out, and I was helping Jock. And we were making bomb shelters under a home and under a Catholic church. And I know there's a lot here I'd like to tell, but got time. Anyhow, we started in, and this old German was the boss on all this work. And as the bomb shelters was making, was digging, this is all sandstone. So you could just take a pick and just pick you out, make into these here houses and make a room down there. And that's what we were doing. And we picked into a woman's, or somebody's cellar. And it was full of potatoes. And so we helped ourselves. And a week, they were all gone. We didn't have to eat that many, but you know, just kept getting.
Here, you want to just pull it apart. There you go.
And it wasn't long that we got called up on the carpet for that, and nobody ate them. So he took us, there was only 8 was guilty, but nobody would admit it. So the old logger Führer, that was a boy that was ahead of us. He was well, he lived in Pennsylvania. He showed me his Pennsylvania driver's license. He was showing everybody that. He was proud of that. And I said, what are you doing over here? And he said, well, I come over here to visit, and the Germany's going to control this world, and I want to be in on that. I said, how much you want to bet? And that made him mad. And he didn't like me after that. But anyhow, he took us out one day time, had a firing squad out there, and he said, you're going to confess or you're going to get shot. Because I know one of you guys did it. One at a time. I was third out. I never heard any shots before. So I didn't confess either. But there's 3 people standing out there with you about 30 or 40 feet in front of you looking at you. Soldiers, German soldiers with their rifles up to their shoulders, aiming at you. And he's saying, ready, aim. But shut your eyes and wait, because you believe you're going to get it. But they didn't do it. They didn't fire. And after he had us through that, well, he kind of forgot about it, I guess. But anyhow, I heard later that they found a German soldier had walked down in where we'd been working, nosing around, which he shouldn't have been. And his hobnailed boots, they tracked him, and I heard he got shot for that. That was terrible. Anyhow.
Jerry, I think we're going to need to stop in a couple of minutes. Maybe we can get this on tape later on, if you want to kind of wind up.
This went on till the day before the war. The Russians were getting so close to us that we could hear their big guns. And the night before the war ended, I guess it ended around midnight. Anyhow, they marched us 20 miles back towards west, and to another prison camp. The next morning, when we get up, we don't know the war's over, and we walk out of this camp, and this old lager Führer gives us each a loaf of sawdust bread. I never told you what our diet was, in case you wouldn't like to lose weight. I went from 195 to 120. I put my arms around my waist, and you get so weak you can hardly. Anyhow, for breakfast we had a bowl of hot water with brown covered water. It wasn't coffee, it was just, I think they used the barley hulls for that. At noon you didn't get anything. And in the evening you got another bowl of hot water with 3 or 4 slices of colorados and a slice of sawdust bread, we called it, on a new steak. That was your diet, and I guarantee you'll lose weight. Anyhow, when they took us out this morning, after the war was over, we never got liberated. They just turned us loose, and we didn't know where we were going or how we were going to get there. But anyhow, we had an interpreter was with us, a German boy, and he talked German, so he asked some questions. We got down about 100 yards from where they gave us the bread, and I looked back. And it was pretty well strung out, but there wasn't no guard behind it. Here we were on our own. What a glorious feeling. After you've been at the car with the bayonet in your rear end all the time, and everywhere you went, It was a glorious feeling. From there we walked, I guess about 300 miles, and came down the hill. Oh, I got some more, but I can't have it. Anyhow, came to Munich, Germany. And from there, they took us to another camp and deloused us. I tell you, we had lice, we had bed bugs, we had fleas, we had crabs. We had every bug that a body can have. And bites all over your body. And we got a good shower, got new clothes, taken over to the heart of France, where they had Camp Lucky Strike, Camp Camel, Camp everything, and all the BWs evidently were taken over here, and we were fed special food and put some weight on. Got to write some letters, you know. And, a few days later, after 30 days, put on another ship and we were going home. Got the United States at Boston on the first day of summer, I think the 21st. From there on, and I had yellow jaundice. And they wouldn't let nobody off with yellow jaundice, but I never reported it. Oh, I was sick, but I didn't want to stay on that boat any longer. I had other ideas. And I went from Boston to Camp Atterbury, another day at Camp Atterbury, and then home.